Hello, Yoel, Yerach. Good to see your names again.
Good afternoon.
How are you all doing?
Everything good. Baruch Hashem. How you vacation?
Oh, it was nice. Hello, Yoel, Yerach. Good to see your names again. Let's turn off the replay sound. I don't need to hear myself multiple times. Gotcha. And let's get back to there. And there we go. And all right. So we'll give it another couple minutes to let people log back in. It looks like we have a number of people who have already come in through YouTube. Hello to you in YouTube land. A reminder, those of you who are following through YouTube, that there is a slight time delay, which means that from when you hear me talking, I may have already moved on about 20 or 30 seconds. So feel free to type in chat, but don't be surprised if I don't respond immediately, or if it seems like I might have already been ignoring you for a certain amount of time. I assure you I haven't. It's just I didn't see your question until it came later on after I'd already begun talking again. There are links for the Zoom and YouTube as well if you'd like to join us there. And of course, there are links to the PDF in both Dropbox and the Zoom chat. I will be displaying the text for both the Torah and the PDF. So if you don't want to follow along on your own device, that's fine. And you just want to keep one screen open, that should still work just fine. Oh, Loretta, good day to you as well. All right, give it just maybe another second. Looks like we are mostly here. I think that means—
Rabbi, you need a haircut.
I need a what?
Haircut. I
need a haircut?
Or beard trim.
It's maybe a little on the shaggy side, but you know, it is customary 3 weeks not to work on the actual beard and hair at the back. Mustache, on the other hand, is considered, especially in the Ashkenazic world, perfectly fine to trim at any time. The idea that having too long of a mustache that interferes with food, the Ashkenazim say, makes one disgusting. And therefore, you're always allowed to avoid being disgusting. All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get the share going for the Torah reading. Oh, need to get the right button again. I have to remember all of the special clicks that running the Zoom class. There we go. Usually we can zoom this in a little bit to make things just a little more legible for people who are working on devices. Get up the YouTube chat over there so I can try and keep an eye on it. If you see me staring off to the left, that just means I'm checking the YouTube chat.
Can you make the text a little bigger?
Bigger still? Let's see. I think I might be able to just go one more notch and still have it work on my screen with the other information I need up there. How's that look?
Good, very good.
And I also recommend investing in a nice pair of reading glasses. Sometimes we should be very thankful for God's beautiful design, even as though some people will complain that why is it that our eye muscles and the shape of our lenses change over time? Well, change over time is the blessing that God gave us that allows us to actually be different than who we were even yesterday. But more importantly, God gave us the knowledge and the material world to reshape the things that change that we don't want to change, so that we can grind glass into lenses or even more advanced polycarbonate whatevers, so that we can compensate for the changes that happen that are unavoidable. And I think that is a great gift, giving us the flexibility to change and the wisdom to know what we can hold steady. All right, well, with that tiny little introduction, let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, it is good to see everybody again, or if not to see you, to at least hear your voices or know that you're there on the YouTube watching. Although my vacation was pleasant and a wonderful time to be with the family, although obviously many of our activities were curtailed during the current crisis, it is still hard to pull myself away from teaching. So it is good to get back and be able to dive into the Torah with the avid learners who come together each week. Reminder that the Mishnah class will also resume tonight at 7 o'clock, and the Pathway to Judaism class will resume tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. And of course, our services during the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Shabbat have been, and Sunday have been maintained by our wonderful volunteers, but I'm looking forward to getting back into them on the Bima as well. So with the commercial over, let's get down to the program. We are at the book of Sefer B'Midbar. We are at the end of the book of Numbers. And at the end of the book of Numbers, we are on the precipice. We are on the threshold, depending upon your perspective, of entering the land of Israel. We have made a large loop through the Sinai Peninsula, as it's now called, and up into what would be modern-day Jordan, perhaps even detouring a little bit through modern-day Saudi Arabia. And we are now standing on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, looking westward into the land of Israel, or Canaan, as it is known at the time. We have fought numerous battles and wars at this point. A reminder that this is 40 years after the Exodus from Egypt, and we are just getting ready to go in. But the place where our particular story is going to pick up for our study today, but having just won numerous battles on that side of the Jordan, the land over there is actually pacified. And with the land being pacified, a proposal is going to come from the tribes of Reuben and Gad. We'll see later that part of the tribe of Manasseh gets involved as well, but right now we need to focus on the Reubenites and the Gadites, the members of the tribe of Reuben and the members of the tribe of Gad, as they are going to approach Moses with an interesting economic proposal, sort of an economic development zone for them and their tribes. Everyone up to speed on the context of where we are in the narrative and what's about to happen? I should point out that for those of you who don't know what comes next in the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy actually takes place over the shortest period of any of the other books of the Torah. Obviously, Genesis takes place over the longest period, going from creation all the way up until Jacob and family end up in Egypt. But Deuteronomy is essentially a very short window where Moses is summarizing much of the Torah to date, clarifying a few points, giving his own review of the events that have led up to that point, and then dying. All before, of course, the people enter the land. So this moment here on the threshold is only moments away from Moses's own passing, and Moses knows this. Right? Moses knows that having reached the threshold of Israel, having brought the people successfully through the wilderness, and having made his own mistakes, that he will not be allowed to journey across the river with them. That means that as the territory is now cleared, he knows his own passing is imminent. And that should be borne in mind as we see his response to the Reubenite and Gadite proposal. Okay, good. Let me just adjust something here. Put that over there. And good. All right. Hold on, just resizing something to try and be able to see people a little bit more easily. Well, to see the names at least. A reminder that you can always use the raised hand if you're in the Zoom. You can also use chat in Zoom if you like, or you can simply unmute yourself and jump right in like you would if we were in the physical classroom together. So, chapter 32 of the book of Numbers, we begin. The Reubenites and the Gadites owned cattle in very great numbers. Noting that the lands of Yazer and Gilead were a region suitable for cattle, the Gadites and Reubenites came to Moses. Eleazar the priest, and the chieftains of the community. Just to pause before we find out what their request is. First of all, notice, of course, that Aaron has passed away, so now it is his son Eleazar who is the Kohen Gadol, and of course they're coming before the rest of the community because they will have a vested interest in what they were about to propose. But of course, what we see at the first line is the underlying motivation of the circumstances that they face. They know that they have a lot of cattle. They are what you would call wealthy with cattle. It seems to be a particular strength of these two tribes that cattle is their strong suit economically. Now, the lands that they have just conquered right across on the eastern border or the eastern bank of the Jordan River seem to be exceptionally good for raising cattle. That is to say, they are more low-lying pastures, fewer hills that would be normally good for sheep and goats. This area over there is considered good for cattle. And they are sensing a business opportunity. They are putting two and two together and saying, we've got cows. This is a good place for cows. Verse 3. Excuse me. Let me just bring down here. So, Atarot, Divon, Yazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elial, Shabam, Nebo, Beon. The land that the Lord has conquered for the community of Israel is cattle country, and your servants have cattle. It would be a favor for us, right? Or more literally using the idiom of biblical Hebrew, if we have found favor in your eyes. They continued, if this land were given to your servants as a holding, do not move us across the Jordan, right? They want this to be the achuzah, the portion that they are allocated, and it should be on this side, the east side of Jordan. Now, remember, notwithstanding many different interpretations of what the promise to Abraham was, or of greater Israel might be, which has unfortunately become very political and politicized, which makes it hard for people to actually check the traditional commentaries wisely. Jewish law makes it very clear that officially the land on the eastern side of the Jordan River, what would be considered the modern day state of Jordan, is not part of Israel proper. The laws of the Torah that apply to the land of Israel do not apply equally to the land that is on the eastern bank. So what they are essentially saying is they're willing to trade. They're willing to give up their portion in the land of Israel itself if they can keep this portion on the other side of the Jordan River and not have to go across the Jordan River. Okay, so what's the response to this very reasonable business request, right? This is somebody who's saying, look, I'm a lumberjack, and this land has a lot of trees. That land over there, not so many trees. So why don't I stay here and work these trees? You go over there, and it's good, right? Why should I take from your possession on the opposite side of the Jordan River if it's not good for you because you'll be giving up land, and it's not good for me because I'll be giving up a more fertile economic opportunity for my particular skill set? Let's work this out. Sounds very, very fair, very, very reasonable. Everybody's a winner, right? The other tribes get more land. The Reubenites and the Gadites, they get land that is better suited to them. And Moses replied, we're now in verse 6. Moses replied to the Gadites and Reubenites, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? Right? Objection number 1. When you say you don't want to cross the Jordan River, that sounds like you're saying, hey, we've already fought wars that gave us territory. You go fight wars to get your own territory. Now, of course, the wars that have just been finished, or battles really, were fought by all of the tribes. Moses seems to be feeling the implication of their request is that they do not want to join in the army as it continues into the land of Israel and continues with the much more difficult job of conquering the fortified city-states of the Canaanite areas. So he is deeply upset by this idea that they are not willing to stand side by side with their brothers the way their brothers stood side by side with them to win this particular land that they are now hoping to claim. Objection number 2 comes in verse number 7. Why will you turn the minds of the Israelites from crossing into the land that the Lord has given them? That is what your fathers did when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to survey the land, right? This was the Meraglim, the spies who went up in Shlach Lecha, in the Torah portion where the spies go up to find. And when they come back, after going up to the Wadi Eshkol and surveying the land, they turned the minds of the Israelites from invading the land that the Lord had given them. Thereupon the Lord was incensed, and he swore, none of them from 20 years up who came out of Egypt shall see the land that I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for they did not remain loyal to me. None except Caleb of Yefuneh and the Kenizzite and Joshua son of Nun, for they remained loyal to the Lord. All right, and Moses continues, the Lord was incensed at Israel, and for 40 years he made them wander in the wilderness, until the whole generation that had provoked the Lord's displeasure was gone. And now you, a breed of sinful men, have replaced your fathers to add still further to the Lord's wrath against Israel. If you turn away from him and he abandons them once more in the wilderness, you will bring calamity upon all this people. All right, so Moses is making a rather harsh condemnation of them. Let's just back up so we can walk through exactly what his issue is. As I mentioned, the first one is, it looks like you don't want to fight alongside your fellows, even though your fellows fought alongside you. That's verse 6, very straightforward. It's not fair. Verse 7 is a deeper objection. Moses is concerned that if the Reubenites stay here, the rest of the Israelites are going to follow suit. All right, the rest of the Israelites are going to go, wait. You know what? You've got a point. We've already fought. We've already won. Why go across the river and do it again? Okay, fine. Maybe this land is not as good. Maybe this land is not the land that was promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Maybe this land is not the one that we were looking forward to. But we don't have to fight anymore. We're done. We can just stay, settle here, and no longer dream of going to the land of Israel. Now, what is Moses especially upset about is not just that that would take out the energy of those who are about to going to melt their morale, but this seems in Moses' eyes to be a repeat of what had happened when the spies had gone up originally 38 some years ago to survey the land of Israel, which is to say that it is going to turn the hearts of the people away from God, that it is going to make the people not believe that God can help them. Because if you are afraid to the Reubenites and Gadites of going into war alongside everyone else and you'd rather not fight, not only does that apply that you're not very fair, but it also implies that you do not believe God has the power to deliver the rest of the land into the hands of the rest of the Israelites. And if you don't believe it, then the other tribes will stop believing it as well. And then we will end up right back where we were 38 years ago with a group of people refusing to enter the land, and God will then turn away from them. Why is that especially poignant and powerful for Moses as a deep source of pain? Of course, he's upset that people might turn away from God, but if they had gone up when God had first told them to, if they had rejected the rumors of the spies, and if they had been able to conquer the land of Israel 40 years ago, Moses would have been able to live in the land and retire there happy along the coast of the Mediterranean or anywhere else, and he would have been able to enjoy the fullness of everything that he had tried to be bringing to his people. But because they refused to go, because they turned away from God, Moses personally suffered. He not only suffered by having to stay with them in the desert, but he suffered because he now has been denied entry into the land of Israel. If they'd gone in directly, perhaps he never would have made a mistake that would have prevented him from crossing it. So they are really striking a nerve here with him, with their unfairness and with their potential erosion of the people's faith in God and in their ungratefulness for everything that has happened by God and personally through Moses in the last 40 years by repeating those mistakes, by not learning from the lessons of their forefathers. So does everyone have an idea now, an understanding of why there is this huge clash here? Why Moses doesn't just say, well, but why he erupts in this extreme condemnation of their behavior. Are we good? I'm not seeing a lot of faces. I only got one video camera on, but I'm happy to hear from people if you got it, and I'm happy to hear if you don't got it, because that way I can explain it more clearly. I'll wait for YouTube to catch up while I grab a quick tea. Okay, hearing no objection, we move on. So we're going to pick up with their response. And this now is on verse 16 of the book of Numbers. Then they stepped up to him, right? This vayigshu is a phrase that repeats itself numerous times throughout the Torah. It is used when Abraham approaches to God to say, are you going to really destroy the righteous along with the wicked when it comes to Sodom and Gomorrah? Turns out there aren't so many righteous there, but Abraham didn't know that. It's the same phrase that's also used when Judah approaches the crazy vizier, who is actually Joseph, to argue on behalf of Benjamin's freedom. So they do seem a little chastened by verse 16. They do seem a little bit like they recognize that they need to appeal here, that they are treading on thin ice. Then they stepped up to him and said, we will build here, meaning east bank of Jordan, sheepfolds for our flocks and towns for our children. Excuse me. So then, verse 17, and we will hasten as shock troops in the van of the Israelites until we have established them in their home, while all our children stay in the fortified towns because of the inhabitants of the land. So we will not return to our homes until every one of the Israelites is in possession of his portion. But we will not have a share with them in their territory beyond the Jordan, for we have received our share on the east side of the Jordan. So they lay out what might be a modified version of their original plan, or it might be the original plan. We'll never know 100% for sure what they would have done if Moses hadn't responded the way he did. But their modified version seems to be saying this. Look, we're going to build a place to keep all of our herds and flocks safe, and we're going to build a place where our children, our young people can be safe so that they're not going across the Jordan River into a war zone. But we also recognize that this area has not been 100% pacified, so we do need to protect them a little bit more than just having the occasional town and tent. So we'll build that here, and when we're done with that, then we will come and we will serve as the vanguard. We will be not only soldiers, but we will be taking among the riskiest positions in the battles as may be necessary for conquering the rest of the land of Canaan. Until, verse 18, everyone else has gotten their portion as well, right? We will have ours here, which is what verse 19 is explaining, and they will have theirs there, and we won't stop until everyone else has it as good as we have it here. They have their portion, we have our portion, then the wars will be over and we'll be able to retire in peace, if you will. So what do we think? Does it sound like a fair deal? Anybody want to venture an opinion on this?
To me, I think it sounded like a fair deal.
Do you think this was their original deal in mind, or something that they have adjusted quickly as Moses accosted them for what he interpreted as their original plan?
I think you're absolutely right that Moses immediately realized what their intentions were, because he knew them so well, and being a prophet himself, I'm sure that he probably read their minds and say, well, no, that's not going to work.
Anyone else? I think that it's very good. Thanks, Michelle. Checking on YouTube for anyone who might be chatting in a comment. Not seeing any. All right, so let's go ahead and see then what the response is going to be. Moses said to them, if you do this, if you go to battle as shock troops at the instance of the Lord, and every shock fighter among you crosses the Jordan at the instance of the Lord, until he has dispossessed his enemies before him, and the land has been subdued at the instance of the Lord, then you return, you shall be clear before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your holding under the Lord. But if you do not do so, you will have sinned against the Lord, and know that your sin will overtake you. Build your towns for your children and sheepfolds for your flocks, but do what you have promised. All right, so a number of things stand out in this retelling of what's going on here, a restatement of Moses of their plan. So first, he is agreeing that they should go and they should be the vanguard. But you'll notice that he is reminding them over and over again that this is not just a matter of the people fighting in order to secure the land, that this is what God is trying to do for God's people. And the people who go into war are not the main ingredient of the victory. It is ultimately God that is bringing victory. And if they think that it's just them that is accomplishing all of this, then their arrogance, which led them to their initial request, is unfortunately going to continue to plague them. So what he's trying to do by repeating over and over again, Lifnei Adonai, before God, what God wants to do, because God wants to do this, and the numerous mentions here is he is trying to correct that error in their mind of treating the land and treating the spoils of war as though this was just a normal mundane activity and not a very unique and very singular instance of God trying to reshape this area so that the people of Israel could be at peace. And John has his hand up. Go ahead.
The lawyer in me loves the fact that there's an offer, a rejection, a counteroffer, an acceptance of the counteroffer with additional conditions, with an ending on the note of what has come from your mouth, you shall do. So there's this lovely interplay of a dialogue that's a good lesson on how to work with a group to come to some sort of common understanding with a back and a fore.
Exactly. I mean, this is a very good model for mediators or negotiations. You might understand, I mean, as a lawyer, that someone might have been deeply offended by the initial statement, as Moses seems to have been, and might have said, absolutely not, how dare you suggest it, and stopped all further communication. But Moses didn't do that. He was still open for them to resubmit their proposal. And they too, when Moses shot them down, might have said, you know what, what's the point of talking with this guy? What's he going to do? Attack us? We'll just stay here. He can go off and do whatever he wants. They might have decided to unilaterally seize that territory and just simply ignore it to the rest of the tribes of Israel. We have plenty of examples from our history of tribes or families of people going their own way. But they chose to re-engage, to reshape what they were requesting. And Moses, as you put it, chose to hear that second request differently than the first. He rather than saying, no, you're just up to your old tricks, he was willing to listen and say, no, this proposal we can work with. And as you pointed out, Moses' restatement and reshaping of their proposal puts additional points in place that are going to hopefully make sure that everything works out the way it should.
I can see you, Rabbi, using those skills in our meetings.
Well, it's not just me using those skills. I like to imagine that everybody around the table recognizes that we're all part of the same nation, even if we're in little different tribes on different policy points. And that, yes, we need to sometimes stick with the conversation, even if we disagree. And hopefully we can find some way to work it out.
Yes, sir.
And in this case, they did. However, excuse me, if on my mouse, we're going to move into our commentary now, because the commentary finds this whole episode fascinating because it is one of the more pragmatic discussions that we see in the Torah. Yes, we had the tactical pragmatic discussion with the spies, although that essentially went nowhere and seems to have been overblown paranoia. We have the practical discussion of the daughters of Slofachad, of what to do with the inheritance issues. And we have this particular practical discussion of how to divvy up the spoils in a way that will work best for the needs of everyone. And as such, it's not surprising that the commentary has been extensive on this section. So just to give a taste of some of it, we're going to jump in, and we're going to begin with a couple parallel phrases that have been used in reference to this section, because many of the commentaries are going to look at Reuben and Gad, the tribes, as being arrogant and as being greedy and as being blessed with wealth, but with wealth that has become a stumbling block for them. So as Habakkuk says in the Tanakh, wealth is treacherous and the arrogant are never at rest. They open their mouths as wide as the grave, and like death, they are never satisfied. In their greed, they have gathered up many nations and swallowed many peoples. And Hosea makes it a little bit more blunt of how this happens. When I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot me. Again, this is echoing Moses' concern in his first rebuttal to them, which is what? You've got what you want. You've got everything you could hope for. And now you're so happy that you want nothing more to do with what God is asking of you, right? Were you sticking with God only until you got what you wanted? And now that you got what you wanted, you could care less about what God wants, right? That seems to be the issue here, is that there is this predilection of people when they have reached a certain level of self-satisfaction, that they feel that they have satisfied themselves rather than it was God who satisfied them. And then they become arrogant and proud because they feel like they are self-made. We won this territory, we have cattle, we're going to settle here, we're going to be rich. And Moses, and in this case Hosea, echoing it, is saying, what about God? Right? God had no part in this? And does God therefore have no more opportunity to motivate you to do something differently? So we're going to look at the commentary from the Midrash that drives this point home about the symbolism, the metaphor that is used to describe Reuben and Gad as the tribes. The tribes of Reuben and Gad, who possessed more wealth than the others, grew to love their material possessions, and this is what encouraged them to separate from their brethren, the other tribes, to the extent that they wanted to make their residence on the east bank of the river of Jordan. A look at history will show us that these tribes were the first to be exiled from their land, both they and the half-tribe of Manasseh, who had also taken up residence on the east bank of that river. From Chronicles, we know that they were exiled about 20 years earlier than the other tribes, that they were taken first when the Babylonians came, when the Assyrians and then later the Babylonians came. Those territories outside the land of Israel were the first to be subjugated by these foreign empires. And we also know from the book of Chronicles that there was inter-rivalry between the tribes on the west bank and the tribes on the east bank. And they did often seem to be acting in ways that were separate and different than the other tribes of Israel. So their separation physically did seem to lead to a separation in their sense of community and their sense of spiritual brotherhood with the rest of Israel. And the Midrash is positing that the only reason that happened was because they had so much that they ended up focusing on it, that their love and devotion to their material possessions is what made them separate. The Midrash is actually implying, if you're reading between the lines here, that it would have been better off, they would have been better off, as well as the rest of Israel, if they had said, you know, this land is good for our cows, but that land, meaning Israel, is better for our spirit. And therefore, we'll take the economic hit, you know, have a little bit less than we might be able to have if we stayed here, and go across the Jordan with the rest of the nation of Israel. We'll live together with them. We'll live closer to the core of our people, and that will be better. And we'll still be wealthy because we've already got plenty, but we just won't be quite as wealthy as we might be if we stayed here on this side of the Jordan. The Midrash seems to be making that as its implied criticism of how they were prioritizing the different things in their life. And the Midrash continues by saying, our sages said that God gave mankind three gifts. They are wisdom, strength and bravery, and wealth. Whoever is endowed with one of these gifts has actually been endowed with all three of them. How is this line to be understood? As long as these gifts are the result of studying the Torah and being God-fearing. Unless these endowments are the product of the above, they are useless in the end. So what the Midrash is trying to imply, before we get to their proof text from Jeremiah, is that there's ways to become wise through the study of Torah. And when one does, one will also find that they are blessed with strength and bravery, and that they will be blessed with material support as they need. And likewise, one who becomes wealthy while being a student of Torah and while fearing God will also find that they have an opportunity for wisdom, and they have the means to be strong and brave. All of these things are interconnected if they come with the right structure and framework that a person is looking for. If they don't, meaning, as we'll see, that if someone just takes wisdom on their own, just studies hard, but is not doing it with the right spiritual focus or from the right source, if someone is merely focused on being strong and brave without understanding why and what's really important in life, and in our particular case, if one is focused on wealth, but not on wealth through the lens that Torah has given us, then those gifts will come and those gifts will go. And those gifts will not really be important to them in the full length of life. Michelle, you've got your hand up.
Yes, sir. I had a quick question. It just came to me. Reuben and Gad, did they ever bring in their offerings to Jerusalem at all? Or did they stay, in their own little world?
They do, but it was their act of trying to set up almost a set of altars on the opposite bank. That was what created a near civil war during the early days of settling. So they did seem to be acting as almost as though they were going to set up a parallel like religion almost. But in the end, they were brought back in so that they would still go to Jerusalem.
All right, thank you.
But it was a close call.
Okay.
This is why the prophet Jeremiah has said in Jeremiah 9:22, and this is, by the way, the text that we read during Tisha B'Av as well. Let not the wise boast about his wisdom. Let not the strong boast about his strength. Let not the rich glory in his riches. But only in this should one glory, if at all, meaning if you're going to be proud of yourself, what is the one source of pride that you should have? In his earnest devotion to me, meaning to understand, to know me, says God. For I, the Lord, act with kindness, justice, and equity in the world. Meaning that if you are wise, if you are strong, and if you are wealthy, or one, two, or three of those things at once, don't brag about that. If you're going to be proud of something, be proud of your understanding of God. And what is God? God is kindness, God is justice, and God is equity in the world. That is where your focus should be. And if you also are wise or strong or wealthy, great, absolutely enjoy those gifts, use them with kindness, justice, and equity, use them with your understanding of God. That is the ultimate way that you show that you're accepting these gifts as being gifts from God, rather than these are things that you have done just for yourself. Again, going back to our Hosea line of when they are satisfied, they become proud. That if you have a gift, you have to make sure that you are still humble before God and recognize that you use your gift in line with what God has taught.
It reminds me a little bit of
Korah?
Late, that same type of reminding me of Korah when you were describing some of the their attributes of Reuben and God and what they're what they did, and they became rich, and all of a sudden it was their opinion was kind of sort of better. So it's interesting it related. I was thinking about Korah also when relating to both of them.
Well, and indeed, the very next text from the Midrash talks about Korah. So you're right on target, right? The three outstanding examples of endowments called wisdom, physical strength, and material wealth, right? Well, the wealthy Korah and the wealthy Haman, right? Haman, were symbols of the latter, one Jewish and one non-Jewish, who came to totally disastrous end, each after having boasted of enormous admiration among his supporters. Right? Both Haman and Korah had a large following of people, and they all seem to have had extreme material comfort. they both had displayed what we call wisdom, meaning they were both clever. They were both intelligent men. They weren't dummies. But instead of this helping them, it led them to an early and ignoble death. They had not been endowed with their wealth from God, but had acquired it by immoral means. Solomon in Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, says, refers to this when he said that riches hoarded by their owners lead to their misfortune. Right? That there are those who are rich and there are those who are rich. There are those who are rich because they have been corrupt and they have been exploitative and they have done many things that were against what God wants, kindness, justice, equity. And there are those who are rich that have done kindness and done justice and done equity. And although their bank accounts may look similar, their spirits are very different. And what will happen to them in the fullness of life and of God's judgment will be very different. It's one of the things that's always perturbed me in American spiritual traditions. There has been, due to various oddities of how America was founded by many of the Protestant splinter groups, a tendency towards what's now usually referred to as prosperity theology, with the idea that if you are rich, it is because God has shown favor on you for being righteous, as though that was the only way a person could ever be rich. But as our sages and our tradition tells us, the history of our own people, let alone the history of the world, is full of people who are very, very wealthy and not very good. So we don't measure a person's worth spiritually simply by their bank account. We measure their worth by how close they are to what the ideals that God has asked us to live by. Akkanee, wonderful commentator, tries to bring this in line with the whole idea of what it means to be blessed and what it means to have choice. I have also heard an explanation of this verse along the lines of the statement in the Talmud from Nida 16. There is one angel who is in charge of everything connected with conception. He presents every drop of human semen to the Lord, and asking him whether the ovum this drop will fertilize shall be endowed with wisdom or foolhardiness, with physical strength or weakness, with wealth or poverty. Because we do know that when somebody is first born, they are often born into a poor or not poor household. They are often born strong or weak. They are often born in ways that will predispose them to finding wisdom or not. He does not ask, however, if the human being that will be born from this drop of semen will be a wicked person or a righteous person, as this is something that God has abstained from interfering with, right? God does not make people good or bad. It is the basis of the whole freedom, the image of God, right? When we were made in God's image, that means that we have the ability to choose right and wrong. God has given to man, as opposed to the angels and animals, not to mention the inert parts of the universe, right? A rock doesn't pick whether it's a good rock or a bad rock. A rock is just a rock. An animal doesn't pick whether it's a good cat or a bad cat, no matter what your relationships may be with cats. And angels even as well are guided precisely by God's intention for each of them, and therefore they cannot be said to be good or bad. Humans, on the other hand, we were made in God's image, and therefore we have the ability to choose. God has allowed us to have that choice. And by having that choice, we therefore now have the opportunity to choose right or choose wrong and to be held responsible for those choices. Even if other things are not always completely in our hands, right? No matter what, I was never going to be an Olympic weightlifter. No matter if I had worked out, every day of my life, it just was not in the cards physically based on my own genetics. That doesn't matter. I can be, however, somebody who chooses to do right or who chooses to do wrong. That is something that is not, there is no predestiny in anybody's life. Everybody good and clear on that? All right. Then we're going to move on a little bit more through the Midrash as they try to understand why they got this whole idea in the first place and how we can then focus it for ourselves. So from Sifrei and the Midrash on Bamidbar earlier, when they were talking about the desire for for having meat, that they didn't have enough meat to eat while they were in the wilderness. And they said, who will feed us flesh? Now, is it because they did not have flesh that they grumbled, right? Is it not written in Exodus? And also a mixed multitude went up with them, and flocks and herds, right? Look, herds. I might think that they had eaten them in the desert, but is it not written upon their entering the land from our section of the Torah, and much livestock were possessed by the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad? But the truth is that they were only seeking a pretext to abandon the Lord. If we go back to our text, you'll notice that when Moses is responding to them, he's not only responding to them about the military abandonment, that they're not willing to fight alongside the others for the rest of the land, but he's also saying you are turning away from God. How do we know this? Well, because when they were demanding meat from God earlier on, all of the Israelites, they had meat. So what was the point of complaining about more meat if they had meat? Well, because the complaint wasn't the real point. It was merely a pretext. They were unhappy with the idea that they would have to follow God's commandments. And so they wanted to complain and to say, basically, why should we follow God? We don't even have enough meat. Well, you know, standing in front of the massive flocks and herds that were all around them. And we know those flocks and herds were still there because when they enter the land, there they are. Of course, it's also not unusual that someone may choose to complain about not having enough, even when they have what someone else might consider was plenty. And then from a question, comment?
Rabbi?
Yes.
We also see that the flocks are their priority in verse 16 in the text, because that's the first thing they want to build is pens for their flock. Well before they take care of their children, they want to take care of their property.
Absolutely. And in fact, once again, I think you and Michelle are working in tag team to help give me segues. The next Midrash from Bhairava is going to draw our attention to that point immediately. So perfect setup. Thank you. For anyone who didn't quite catch it, just pay attention to the next Midrash and you'll see what John was trying to draw our attention to. The expression, a wise man understanding is at his right hand, applies to Moses, while a fool's understanding at his left applies to the children of Reuben and the children of Gad, who made the main thing subordinate and put the subordinate thing first, right? They put that which was most important second and put that which was less important above it. For they cherished their property more than human life. That sounds like quite a claim. What's their proof? Saying to Moses, we will build the sheepfolds here for our cattle and cities for our little ones. Notice the order. Sheep first, kids second. Moses has said to them, that is not right. Rather do more important things first. Build your cities for your children, and afterwards folds for your sheep, which indeed is how Moses phrases it in verse 24 when he is restating their request. They talk about their animals first and their children second, and then Moses, when he is agreeing, puts a little change in it and mentions their kids first and their animals second. This is a very sharp way of criticizing them, of saying, don't tell me what you're doing for your animals first and then your kids as an afterthought. Tell me about your kids first and your animals and that you'll do after you've taken care of that. So yes, indeed, one of the clues that the Reubenites and Gadites were not merely talking about efficient use of the land, but really did have their priorities backwards is precisely this. Is precisely the fact that when they're talking about their plans, they're planning for their economy before they're planning for their progeny. They're planning for their wealth before they plan for their kids. And Moses, of course, being Moses, not only notices that, but restates it in the order that it should have been in the first place. You take care of your kids first, and then you take care of whatever economic needs you may have, right? Children before shekels. Make sense? Okay.
Yes, God also, because they were not close to all the other tribes. So it was even, that bad.
Yep, it was, like I said, this is so fascinating because it is this dynamic of this practical question, and because we get the back and forth between them. Usually conversations in the Torah can be very short or one-sided, but because we get the back and forth, you can see how much more detail comes out of how different people are looking at the world and how Moses is trying to reshape and direct them. And of course, by redirecting them, of course, the Torah is meant to redirect us. As Vayikra Rabbah goes on to try and explain of why do we care what they want to do anyway, right? I mean, after all, couldn't Moses have just said, you know what? You want to live over there. You want to take care of your sheep more than your kids. You want to not be part of us. Fine, go. We're done, right? To borrow from another religious tradition, we're washing our hands of you. But as we see in Vayikra Rabbah, there's a problem with that. And Hezekiah taught from Jeremiah, Israel are scattered sheep. Why are Israel likened to a sheep? Just as a sheep, when hurt on its head or some other body part, all of its body parts feel it. This was apparently something known to shepherds, that sheep hurt all over when any one part hurt. But he is using this as a metaphor for the nation of Israel. When one man sins, you will be wrathful with the whole community, taken from Numbers 16. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught this as a parable, a very famous one that has often been quoted without attribution, even by non-Jews. Men were on a ship. One of them took a drill and started drilling underneath him. The other said to him, what are you sitting and doing? He replied, what do you care? Is it not underneath my area that I'm drilling? They said to him, but the water will rise and flood all of us on this ship. Right? If Reuben and Gad had been allowed to do what they were doing, if they had been allowed to set a standard of focusing on what was right for them rather than what was right for the nation or what was right for the rest of the conquest or right for any of the other aspects, then that would have eventually led to a flood for the entire community, which was, remember, Moses's response. You think staying over here is just about you, but if you do this, you're going to sap everyone else's enthusiasm and morale, and we're never going to finish getting into the land of Israel. We're going to fail because you turn away. It's not just about you. It is about all of us, and why they had to then resubmit their request into a way that showed that they would still stay connected to everyone else. And I just saw a chat. Why is the chat not coming up for me? Hello, where'd my chat go? Sorry, it's been a while since I've used Zoom, and apparently it's not wanting to show me the chat comments. There we go. Yerach, yes, we are one people, and that is our strength. If we are divided, we all fail. And Michelle responds, amen. Exactly right. Exactly right. And that notion that we are one people, that we are linked, and if something happens to one part, it affects all of us, has been our strength, and why throughout history, one of the things that has characterized the Jews around the world is that when something is bothering one community or one member of a community, the rest of the community moves to support. Just as a little aside, and I hope this doesn't make us go too far over, but there had to be an entire body of Jewish law and discussion during the Middle Ages of how to handle the mitzvah of redeeming captives, because Jews became so famous for doing whatever it took to redeem someone who had been taken captive by pirates or by soldiers or by anyone else, that it became ruinous to the communities, because we ended up having to pay so much to take them. And it became dangerous because everyone wanted to catch Jews because we were worth more money than anyone else, because our communities would pay it. They knew that if they captured a Jew in Tunisia and they tried to sell him in Italy, someone in Italy would pay a fortune to get that Jew free. It didn't matter whether they knew him. It didn't matter whether they had a lot of money. They would do whatever it took. And so we actually had to develop an entire body of rabbinic teaching of how to try and deal with this situation in order to prevent more Jews from being taken captive as a form of profiteering by pirates and others. It's just a testament to the fact that throughout our history, we have stood by each other so much that we actually had to find ways to tone it down in order to protect ourselves. It's the way that being incredibly good people to each other can sometimes have unintended consequences.
Yeah, around 4 or 5 years ago, Rabbi, I remember that there was a reporter going out to the Palestinian community, and they were saying how important the Jews, you know, they couldn't lose one soldier, they couldn't lose one person, they would do whatever it takes to get him back. And that was not the case for the Palestinians. You know, if they get lost, they lost, you know. And so the guy was basically saying, I'm not sure if he was a Christian Palestinian or what, or Muslim, but he was basically saying how valuable is a Jewish life to a Jewish, you know, person or community. So it's interesting that at least we have kept that.
It is indeed, and it is actually still something which is quite politically a third rail in Israel. When there are Israelis who are taken captive, or there are the remains of Israeli soldiers that are being held as ransom, it often becomes a very painful conversation of how many terrorists do you release in order to reclaim the remains or God forbid, somebody who's been being held captive. And the governments of Israel are in very much a no-win situation of trying to do everything they can to get someone back, but also not trying to encourage more to be taken or to release those who will do more harm to the rest of the community. It is a very painful place to be. And I don't envy any government that deals with those situations, which unfortunately have been there since the beginning of our new country. Our new old country, it's new old land. I think that was the famous title of a book somewhere, but that's a whole nother conversation. Let's just finish up with one more teaching, this time from Rabbeinu Bachya, and then a little summary from Deuteronomy where God tells us that he knew this was a problem all along. When Kohelet, Ecclesiastes 10, speaks of the heart of the wise being on the right, where the heart of the foolish is on the left, our proverb that was discussed earlier, he had in mind people like members of the tribe of Gad and Reuben, who made things of secondary significance, such as their livestock, their primary concern. That is, they confused that which is essential with that which is merely auxiliary. They demonstrated this when they mentioned their livestock before referring to their children. God told them that people who considered their personal wealth as more important than their children would find that their wealth was not blessed. This is what Solomon taught us in Proverbs 20. An inheritance gained hastily, meaning sudden riches, at the outset will not be blessed in the end. This is also the meaning of Proverbs 23. Do not tire yourself out to become rich. Desist out of a feeling of insight. The truly wealthy individual is he who is content with what God has seen fit to provide for him, as we know from Psalms 128. When you consume the fruit of the labors of your hands, you will be happy and feel contented. When you enjoy what you've actually created, and whatever that may be, small, medium, or large in quantity, that is where you find satisfaction. And there are those who have little that can feel content, and those who have much who do not feel contentment. It is not about the amount, it is about how we relate to what we have and what is in our hands. And as Rabbeinu Bachya is trying to imply to us here, if somebody is more concerned with their wealth than their children, what are they concerned with? If your wealth is not there but to benefit your children, your family, your community, is it there only so that it can sit in a bank account and make you feel good? How can that possibly make your life feel better? If you forget that the reason you work hard is in order to support your family and other noble things in life, then why are you working hard? Is it just for bragging rights? It is completely backwards in mind. You have to remember that first and foremost, your family, especially your children, should be the priority. And then the other things that Jeremiah reminded us of justice, of mercy, of equity, these have to be our priorities. And to enjoy our wealth with those things is absolutely fine. Judaism has never had a problem with people being rich, right? Being rich is not a sin, right? We never made statements about needles and rich people. Instead, being rich should be an opportunity to use it for the benefit of making your family able to have all that they need and to grow closer to God, and for, if you're blessed with even more, making your community and the rest of the world have those blessings as well. As Deuteronomy tells us itself, when you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Right? That's what it takes. If you eat and you are satisfied, then you will recognize it is time to bless. And those who fail to bless are usually those who are failed to ever feel satisfied, those who are failed to ever feel like they have enough. There wasn't room on the page, but there's an amazing quote from Rambam Maimonides, who says, those who think they will be happy when they are able to afford to eat from silver plates will find that they want gold plate. And those who have gold plates will find they want plates encrusted with gems. Right? You need to be able to be happy with what you have in order to be able to recognize that you have a blessing. And then you will bless with whatever it is that you have been given.
I've never heard that one before. That's a first. That's interesting. Thank you. About Rambam.
Yes. It's you know, a lot of people think that they just discovered that wanting more and more and more is a modern feature of the consumer society. But it turns out people have always wanted more for no good reason. It's an interesting evolutionary biological slip in our mind. I personally believe that when you were, you know, running around on the savannas of Africa chasing a herd of wildebeest, getting 2 wildebeest was better than getting 1, right? When you always lived with very little and very hard to get by, wanting more than you currently had was a good way of making sure you got up from the cave fire and went out and tried to get more. But nowadays, that most people are able to find sufficient to support themselves, we have to be very careful that we motivate ourselves not just with more, but what it is that we will do with more. That has to be secondary to what it is to serve God, what it is to serve our family, what it is to serve our community. Any other questions or comments before we wrap it up for today? Oh, chat came up again. Yera, Pakea Vote says that a rich person is a person who is happy with what Hashem has given him. Absolutely right. And that is something that has been used as one of those anchor points for our people and for the teaching of our people. And it's unfortunate that it has to still be restated. Especially now that we live, even with our current economic difficulties, in a time of greater plenty than the world has ever known. But it does still have to be restated over and over and over. All right, thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be back together again. I look forward to those who want to join us for Mishnah tonight or tomorrow for Pathways. Or for knowing that you're out there enjoying our Shabbat services together and Sunday Minyan on Sunday. Take care, everyone, and be well.
Okay, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi. Nice class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye, everyone.